Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Wow, it's awful quiet tonight. Well, it's good to have everybody out on this Monday night. Kind of rainy and stormy outside, but it's nice and warm in here. So we've got a good opportunity to get away from the elements and just kind of forget about the day and give it all to God. To spend some time in the Word, to pray together, and to just honor Him tonight. So I'm going to ask Pastor if he would open our service in prayer tonight, and we'll get started. The song we're going to sing tonight, there's something about that name. It's just a little bit different feel, like I've been throwing at you guys pretty much every Monday night, but I think it'll bless you as we sing through it. So stand and sing with us if you would. There's something about that name. Jesus, 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 there's just something about that name. Master, Savior, Jesus, like the fragrance after the rain. Jesus, 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 let all heaven and earth proclaim. Kings and kingdoms will all pass away, but there's something about that name. Let's do it again. Jesus, 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 there's just something about that name. Master, Savior, Jesus, like the fragrance after the rain. Jesus, 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 let all
pass away, but there's something about that name.
Thank you very much. You may be seated, Pastor.
Thank you for coming out, for joining us online tonight. For those of you who join us online, and some weeks that can be a pretty decent number, we really appreciate that. Next week we will not be online. We will be here. It is the night before the election, as you know. We are encouraging people next Monday to fast and pray. At our prayer meeting next Wednesday night, we are just going to pray for our country, for the election. We are not praying for the victory or the defeat of any candidate. We are praying for God's will. We are praying for spiritual healing, and we are praying for righteousness. If you could join us live, that would be a real blessing. If you are unable to do that, I would encourage you to take some time in your own home or wherever you find yourself next Monday night to pray for the election. Also would encourage you to become informed and plan on voting if you have not already done so. But that's the plan for next week. Tonight we continue for a little bit with our series on discouragement. I'm going to make a transition tonight into a new aspect of it. We have talked about its relevance. Again, in the last couple of months, I've been trying to stay caught up on mental health issues nationwide in the state of Maine. And folks, you really can't find anything good. I mean, the COVID situation has impacted people mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We have given a kind of a description, a definition of what discouragement is. We have gone through the Hebrew words, the English definitions, and we've talked about the characteristics, which can be a combination of physical things, money shortage, time pressure, not feeling physically well, disarray, and they're spiritual things. Comparison, inferiority, unconfessed sin, ungrateful spirit. Tonight, I want to begin to look at the characteristics of discouragement. And particularly if these are true in your own life, then, I mean, they're usually, you know it, you may not want to admit it, but particularly because we're told to encourage one another daily, then just to give you some insight on maybe what to look for as we interact with other people, if somebody is feeling down or has the blues, or whatever contemporary term we wish to use there. But there are very visible signs when someone is experiencing discouragement, particularly for an extended period of time, and probably particularly maybe on more than just a surface level. We will get all of these from Psalm 77, which was written by Asaph, contemporary of David, a Levite, definitely involved in worship. He was a musician. I believe that he was the worship leader in David's time. He writes a number of psalms. Psalm 77 is one, and he is discouraged. And I would suggest to you that he is on the verge of a breakdown, or has already achieved that as he writes this psalm. Now he recovers, and so we will use him not only for the characteristics of discouragement, but when we get into the cure, which will be our next major section, we also will draw upon him. But he gives us a phenomenal insight. And so I just want to deal with four of the characteristics tonight. I want to take a little more time to pray. Number one, we will call it reduced in spirit. The verse in Psalm 77, I remembered God and was troubled. I complained. Look at the last phrase, beloved. My spirit was overwhelmed. In the Hebrew, it has the idea to faint. Now, you know what happens when somebody physically faints. I have never experienced it. I'm not in a hurry to do so. I have seen it occur. I've been around people when it happens. I guess physically, a loss of blood to the brain or whatever, and you just sort of blip. You just sort of collapse. He has emotionally fainted. He is reduced emotionally. We use an analogy here, folks. To be physically tired is dangerous. There are physical dangers. It can impact health. There are safety issues if you're operating equipment or driving a vehicle or something like that. We have seen that the physical body can be one of the major causes of discouragement. We see it here in this psalm. He has some sort of a really icky disease that he is dealing with. It is impacting him. One of my favorite Vince Lombardi quotes, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." And Lombardi was way ahead of his time. In that day and age, most NFL teams played themselves into shape, not Lombardi teams. They came into the season in shape. Lombardi believed that football games were won or lost in the second half. Tom Landry also embraced that same mentality. Probably most coaches do today, because you just get tired of getting beat on or beating on somebody. And so the conditioning was a real key. I would suggest to you what is true physically is true. And just think about it when you're tired sometime. For an extended period of time, you've burned the candle at both ends, you haven't been sleeping well. I know several of you men have worked or work shift work. Your body wasn't designed for that. You know that. You were designed to work in the day and sleep at night. There's a reason why there's a shift differential. It's blood money. You are trading time for money. I remember when my dad first started at the Woodland Mill, he worked shift work for a time. I can remember coming home after school, 3 o'clock, 3:15, and being loud, and mom's, your father's sleeping, things like that. And you've dealt with it. But you just think of a period when you went through an extended period of you were just worn down. And it impacted you emotionally, mentally, spiritually. That is true emotionally. When you are emotionally tired, you know what I'm talking about? You've dealt with something for an extended period of time. It doesn't go away. It's always there. There doesn't seem to be any hope. You can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Then we are reduced in spirit. And beloved, at some point, it is going to catch up with us. And it impacts us in every area of life. It impacts us physically. I'll give you an example from Nehemiah chapter 4, which is, again, one of the key passages of discouragement. And we saw from this passage the cause of discouragement here was disorder, and that the rebuilding of the wall was a two-step process. Number one, there was a lot of demolition. There was a lot of rubbish that had to be carried away. I mean, it's not skilled labor, but it's backbreaking, and it's just discouraging to have to do that day after day after day. And then as the rubbish was taken away and the construction site was cleared of debris, they were rebuilding the wall. But it was tiring work. And Nehemiah 4, we are approximately halfway through the project. Now, I've mentioned this before, beloved. Any time in life when you are involved in anything major, beware of the halfway point. I think we're vulnerable to discouragement. I think we're vulnerable to quitting. You're halfway through paying off your mortgage. You're halfway through paying off an automobile loan or a student loan. You are halfway through college. I am convinced that in a 4-year degree, your sophomore year is your roughest year. Because when you're a freshman, it's new and it's exciting. When you're a junior, an upperclassman, you can see the end, but you're that sophomore. You're that wise fool, so to speak. And that's when most people really struggle. But there's something about the halfway point. And we get to the halfway point, and notice who is complaining. Judah. Beloved, always take note when Judah is brought to the forefront. Why? They're the big brother that takes care of everybody else. And if Judah is tired, guess what? Everybody else is tired. It's not good that Judah is tired. And Judah says, the strength of the bearer of the burdens is decay. There is much rubbish. We are not able to build the wall. Oh, really? Now, it's not going to come up, but if you go back to 4:6, we are told the wall was at half its height because the people had a mind to work. But they broke at that point. And that's the problem, beloved, with being emotionally reduced. And I would summarize it in this sentence. We focus in on what we can't do. We are not focusing in on what God can do. And it's something I've dealt with the COVID thing. And I just finally had to tell myself to stop it. I had to stop focusing in on what I couldn't do. I need to be focusing in on what God could do. And it's been a game changer for me. Not perfect, but it's improved a lot. Because if we focus in on what we can't do, we're in a world of hurt. It is all about Him. But I think one of the major problems with being reduced in spirit, it changes that focal point. We become emotionally fatigued, we become emotional cowards, and we get a lot of spiritual tunnel vision, myopia, if you will, and we're focusing on the wrong thing. I found this verse in Proverbs. Heaviness in the heart of a man maketh it stoop, but a good word maketh it glad. Again, the power of encouragement and words. And we'll talk about that later in the series. Beloved, it's interesting, that word heaviness, that is the only time it is used in the Hebrew Old Testament. You know what the definition is? Anxiety, fear. But isn't that vivid? That anxiety and fear are described as emotional heaviness. It's hard to carry a load of anxiety. It's hard to carry a load of fear. Matter of fact, we weren't intended to do that at all. And then the idea of stoop, which it's a physical term. You've seen somebody, elderly. They've worked physically hard all their life. And, their bones, their skeletal system is beginning to break down and things like that. And, how they walk. That's the concept, beloved, to bend over. But that's what fear and anxiety do. They make our heart bend. And that's not good courage, is it? And 8 times in the Old Testament, we are commanded to be of good courage. But that's one of the characteristics. We are reduced in spirit. We are emotionally tired when we are discouraged. Characteristic number 2. We are robbed of sleep. Again, back to Psalm 77. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. Now, is that, and there's a theological flaw in there, because if we can't sleep, whose problem is that? Is it God holding our eyes open? No. And so there's some mislogic in there, if you will. But it's a good characteristic. Isn't it interesting how fear and worry and discouragement become magnified at night? Now, none of you do this, but there are people who wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm one of them. On occasion. By the way, 3 o'clock in the a.m. is the hour of death. More heart attacks occur at 3 in the a.m. than any other time in a 24-hour period. Yeah, just think about that. That'll help your worry and anxiety, won't it? So maybe check your heart the next time you wake up at 3 o'clock in the a.m. In the military, that's when most surprise attacks occur, because that's when most human bodies are in REM, rapid eye movement, and that's when you should be sound asleep. But it is, and I've experienced it, folks. Troubles, worry, disease, death, financial pressure, my little to-do list on my Post-it, all seem to be worse at night. And the only thing that I can suggest, folks, and sometimes it works for me and sometimes it doesn't, pray yourself back to sleep. All right? Just begin to pray. And I'm not guaranteeing you will go to sleep, but it's better than laying there thinking about all the what ifs, if you will. Come to the Lord with open hands, pray, and keep your hands open while you're praying. Don't clench those things and bring them back to your own self. But that's a characteristic. And in many instances, when we're struggling to sleep, there's some discouragement lurking in the background. Number 3, we refrain from speaking. Same verse, I believe. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. Again, you and I have never done this, but you have seen somebody non-verbally, you could tell something was wrong, and you said, hey, what's wrong? Are you okay? And what was the response? Oh, nothing. Ah! And it's not good. Now, gentlemen, I'm going to bust on us tonight for this one. I observe this with men. Again, when we're discouraged, when there's a problem, or when men are dealing with some sort of a troublesome issue, whether discouragement or otherwise, we have a tendency to withdraw. And it's not good. We have a tendency to isolate ourselves. I don't think you ladies are as prone to doing that. You are more social, you are more relational than we are, but it is something that men do. We shouldn't. We are told in 2 Corinthians that isolation can be a strategy of the enemy. But I observe there are a lot of lonely men in our culture in Christendom. It's sad, it's tragic, and it is unnecessary. And there are many instances in life when to hold your tongue is a very wise thing. But when you are discouraged, that is probably not a good strategy to follow. Now we need to be tactful. You need to have discernment of discretion on who you, quote, dump on and who you reveal your innermost feelings to. There are a lot of trust, a lot of credibility issues here. There's no doubt about that. But the silent treatment, I believe, will play into the enemy's hands and will ratchet the discouragement up. It will not fix or cure it. Number 4, we are reminded of the past. And Asaph nails this one for us in verse 5. I have considered the days of old, the years of the ancient times. What's he talking about? The good old days. You've heard somebody talk about that. And I'm old enough, beloved, that I get it, but there's a psychological mechanism here called repression. In that when we think about the past, we usually think about the good and we repress that which wasn't good. And we have to be aware of that. And in reality, there's no such thing as, quote, the good old days. We all have a past. And the common denominators of all of our past, there are good things in our past, there are bad things in our past. There are things we'd like to relive, there are things we'd like to erase. Yeah. Welcome to humanity. Welcome to being a fallen image bearer. The past is important, beloved. Even Solomon talks about in the Proverbs about being aware of your history. But yet, the past is not an anchor. And that's the problem that often occurs when people are discouraged. Their past becomes an anchor. The past is a rudder. It's gone. You can't do anything about it. I mean, there's forgiveness and there are things that can be fixed, but you can't relive it. We have no assurance of tomorrow. I have today. And that's very simple, but that's reality. But to be stuck in the good old days is not wise. We have a biblical example in Haggai and Zechariah. Chapter 2, they're discouraged. And the prophet asked this question, who is he left among you that saw this house in her first glory? Beloved, what happened there, and this is remarkable, 70-something years prior to this, there were little children, toddlers, elementary school kids, taken captive, lived through the 70-year captivity. When it was time to come back, even though they're in advanced age, they come back. They're now probably in their early to mid-80s. But they saw Solomon's temple. Wow. And they remember. How could you forget? And now they see this, what's happening now? And the prophet asked the question, is it not in your eyes in comparison as nothing? And from a physical perspective, it was a shack. God had a really cool plan for it, but it's going to take about 600 years. But it was nothing. Zechariah addresses the same thing. Who hath despised the day of small things? He's referring to the temple. The physical construction, the physical size of the temple. It was nothing compared to Solomon's temple. Small things. That's a rebuke, beloved, to despise that which God had ordained, but they were stuck in a time warp. And then we'll let Solomon have the last word. Ecclesiastes 7:10. Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. And beloved, if it's not wise, what's the only other alternative? It's foolishness. To want to go back to a better age. It simply didn't exist. It's a figment of our imagination. And usually what happens there, present opportunities are being wasted. We're missing that, which the Lord is giving us opportunity to do in the present. And so those are some of the very tangible characteristics of discouragement. I think we need to be sensitive to these things. We need to be aware of them in our own lives. If we find them sneaking in, we ought to have the spiritual discernment, to begin to deal with them spiritually, to not let them linger or take root or anything like that. And so just that far for tonight. In 2 weeks, we have a couple more we will knock out, and then we will begin to look at some of the cures for discouragement. Folks, continue to pray for Frank Matthews. Chemo treatment last week didn't beat him up